you need, I guess you need the generative AI to build the interface, like if you want to have a patient that you're seeing in front of you and responding to the, I guess, to the things that you're doing. I guess I don't know. Yeah.
So in the quality improvement / ICU liberation group, we had the advantage of sitting outside, which was also some disadvantage at times. No one got sunburned, I don't think. Maybe Kurt. But our themes, I think, are pretty close to the clinical trials group, and so I should have snuck myself in right after Chris went. We spent some time defining problems, which, as you might imagine, there are a host of. Some of which included even talking about the concepts that thinking of QI as research and interacting with IRBs and utilizing the idea of QI to bypass some of the requirements of IRBs. We didn't solve that problem. And then, but the need for data to have a high level of detail and timeliness in order to make it effective as research as well. We talked about ICU liberation as a clear set of goals, and so we use that kind of as our structure to then go down the solutions pathway. And appreciating that at least with ICU liberation, we have some guidelines that have been handed to us from, quote unquote, the experts, with some documentation standards as well, which are also an opportunity. As we talked about the data parts of QI and ICU liberation, we came to a lot of the same themes that the clinical trials group came to and that have been talked about already. The need for real-time data for not just to be collecting this and determining what works on a systems level, but being able to feed it back to clinicians so that it can impact the care of individual patients was a high priority. The ability to create tools that have that can be disseminated and distributed and implemented at multiple sites in multiple settings, which gets us back to the variability of one unit versus another and what works in one place and what doesn't work in another. EHR integration is foundational, certainly. The idea of human resource minimization across the pathway of implementing these tools, but also gaining the data back from implementing these tools. Data collection is a limited data set, and that whatever we collect, we probably want to make sure that it's specific to the questions that we have and also practical in a lot of different ways, which gets us back to the human resource minimization as well. However, we also wanted complete capture. Like we want to be able to track these patients and their exposures and outcomes over time. And to be able to define those exposures and define those outcomes in specific ways. We talked about the idea of data sharing and common data models and whether that's helpful or not helpful, and I'll come back to that in the solutions as well. And the difficulty with manual data extraction, manual data entry, and error in transcription as being significant. We also talked about the validation of data elements and whether we can trust what we ultimately get out, whether it's from a transcription problem or even from the clinical level, that the way we capture data into our EHRs to begin with isn't always a path or a methodology that can be entirely trusted. And as we talked about solutions, I think we didn't come up with so much of a prototype as a set of things we would like to see happen in order to facilitate high quality QI work and potentially ICU liberation as an example of that. So one of those criteria was automation and minimization of human and data interaction at all stages of the pathway. High on the list was the utilizing, I think what Kurt was describing as the low-hanging fruit, that when we decide to put forth the effort to do this work, that we're implementing guideline recommended tools and monitoring metrics and outcomes. Sorry. As we talked about ICU liberation specifically, we talked about gaining group agreement on the ABCD, the alphabet elements, and that as we do data extraction, that we're choosing specific events for each element that can then be defined, followed both as metrics and then potentially as outcomes to be measured as our and benchmarked across units and centers. But that data collection was practical, and that it was both a balance of the things that we already have, but also ensuring that we have enough specificity if we're adding elements into our data capture, that it's going to be the elements that we want for the alphabet. As we ended up talking about our prototype and the longer list of things that we would like to see, we were talking about combining both semantic precision as well as computational precision, again, to make sure that we're getting the data in that we want and that we're defining the elements well, and that when we get them out, they mean what we think they mean. We want to ensure that we have a reliable time cycle, again, that feeds back at the unit level and the patient level ideally. So nearing real time would be our ideal. And that our general model may start with some common data elements that utilize structure that's already been established, but not to be hampered with the data elements that don't have that structure yet, and to be willing to create our own data elements while we work collaboratively with larger groups to ensure that those data elements get to a common data model ultimately. So building on common data models and adding PICU specific and project specific data elements as well if those haven't been established. So we have a long list, but I think a lot of these things were themes that we heard in a lot of the other groups. And I think certainly as I was listening to the amazing conversation and the concerns as well as opportunities that were brought forward from the perspective of what we're trying to accomplish, which you'll hear more about tomorrow in the PDC, the idea that a lot of this ends up, for me, being marching orders of some sort, right? In our ability to make the tool that we're hoping to build in a collaborative way as meaningful and effective as we know it can be. So I'll open it up to the rest of the group. They were, again, excellent conversation. Yeah, please.
So I'm going to reveal my status as a shirt tucker from Texas, and I operate at a very low level compared to where we've been talking. I was kind of excited to be in the decision support group because compared to precision medicine and arrest prediction or predicting adverse events and things like that, that to me sounds like that is kind of like up in the clouds riding the rainbow type of stuff. And decision support is where you're actually going to go get in the dirt and make a difference in somebody's life. And Randall mentioned earlier today that they stopped calling it MuckMed. I actually liked MuckMed. I think that we are in this group today trying to get our data into a common data platform. We are still in the muck. And I don't think we've earned the right to graduate from MuckMed to a fancier title, Randall. I think we are still in MuckMed right now. So, but at any rate, I think that one of the things that I'd like us to reflect on and what we've heard today is there is a fantastic set of vision in the room about where we're going with all of this. This is the why. I've heard a lot of why we're doing it and a lot of destinations where we want to be. I'm going to argue that, if I were to ask Eugene right now of the various prototypes that have been pitched, how many can you go into an office right now and start coding?
Probably not too many.
None of them, right? So, we need a low-hanging piece of fruit. We need something that's very concrete and simple. We need a hello world we can work together with data. And it needs to be kind of simple and stupid to start with. And then once we can take that step, we need to start marching with it. And that goes back to the PDSA cycle, right, that y'all were talking about earlier. The way that lives is that you take another step. You get your data back, you take another step. You get your data back, you change it, you take another step. And the latency of data, right now we're just trying to get any data in, but we do need to turn these pipes on. You mentioned that you're going to have a hard time at your hospital getting real-time data in. I think we have to get there. If this is going to work the way we have been envisioning it working, we have got to get there, and we need to find a way to make it happen. So I'll get down off my soapbox now and let the rest of the group talk. Thank you.
One of the things that comes up for me a lot as someone who's really on the data side is, and I think it's come up in a lot of different ways today, is how do you define truth? What does it mean when you, as a clinician, ask me to provide you with data element X? And so for me, like, that is the lowest of low-hanging fruit, is to get this very a specific and detailed communication going about exactly what you mean, and then because without knowing what you mean, nobody can provide it. And so I also think that comes up when we were talking about some of the other groups, as far as like data literacy, and I think it's also a much broader conversation. It's not limited to this, especially when you start talking about learners using YouTube as learning tools. You can't just take that at face value. So I think, as citizens of the world, we need to be thinking about how you improve data literacy, both within your specific field, but also in a much broader level. And again, to me, it all ties together as far as like, what is truth? And truth can be, like, objective truth can be different things. VPS defines ICU admit time as the first heart rate in the unit, but Cerner doesn't. So neither one of them is necessarily wrong. We just have to know exactly what we're talking about when we're talking about these things.
It was great to read your overview of how the QI discussions seem to parallel or overlap a lot with clinical trial discussions, and it reminds me of, I think, how Bob Tamburo ended our discussions, which is the need to better enmesh clinical trials and usual care delivery and quality improvement. There is this materializing space more in the arena of like CMS and a lot of the adult quality measures surrounding digital quality metrics and electronic quality metrics, which there hasn't been a lot of pediatric effort in to date, at least that I'm aware of. And I'm wondering, one, if your group kind of touched on that, because it does get at a lot of the desire to standardize data, to develop things that are readily electronically extractable at the site level, and to center different areas of care and focus them on measures that are less labor intensive to collect. And I think there's an opportunity in our field specifically, because so many things are poorly defined in the quality improvement space, to lead the conversation in that, because it is an opportunity to enmesh clinical investigation with the QI world. If we're coupling incentives and reimbursements and all those other things to measures that CMS cares about, well, then you can also think in parallel about how to design studies related to what actually generates the best measures. So I don't know if you guys talked about EQMs, DQMs, or at all.
No,
Okay.
not specifically. No, just the philosophical challenge.
That's exactly right. I mean, I think if you have a big multi-center electronic record data source, then there's an opportunity there to define measures that serve the interests of the clinical investigators, as well as our field in general, in terms of what we think should be performance improvement.
I just wanted to add, I think Alyssa hit on one thing, although I'm not sure I used the word truth. I think basically what is standardized. We can pick definitions, and so you brought up the admission time to the ICU. VPS uses a definition based on some of the issues of a patient coming in and being taken care of versus what's available, easily found within the EHR, which is a whole different mechanism. So we can redefine and standardize, and that's probably, if we're going to use data automated out of the EHR, that's probably what we're going to have to do with a lot of these things. Currently in the clinical VPS end of things, most of those were based on what we had available. For instance, you know, how do you know what's an unplanned admission to your ICU? We know because we defined it, and we defined it 15 years ago. So one of the things that this group could do is what's available in the EHR to be able to do these definitions that make the most sense with the data that's available in the EHR. Because right now, you're having trouble defining admission to the ICU using the EHR because it doesn't match up with what we're doing clinically in our other units. So I think it's a good opportunity for this group to take an advantage of do it now. You're the group that can do it.
So going back to a comment about the metrics for quality and standardizing both the measurement of it and the outcome and the interval for the outcome with which that's measured. As a fellow, I worked with HUCUS at the VA, and my mentor's charge was to do VISN level quality assessment using the EHR. And what she found was when providers knew what they were being evaluated on, they then gamed the system. So when you're getting judged on whether or not your patient's systolic blood pressure is in target range and that you intervened appropriately to address their blood pressure, then complex patients with complex diagnoses and complex social situations then had their follow-up with a nurse-only visit, so the blood pressure wasn't recorded under the physician's name and follow-up. Right, so they got their 2-week follow-up visit, but the physician wasn't credited with the bad blood pressure. So because reimbursement was tied to quality of care initiatives. So there's a whole host of secondary effects, and that's what she was reporting at the VISN level, that in fact, people are gaming the system. And so when it's just EHR, there's this domino effect, just as an aside, that people do that.
That's very, very inspirational.
So I think going back to the points on if we don't do it, then someone else is going to do it for us. But I think one of the challenges is when you define some of these metrics and harmonize standards in a closed group environment, it becomes a niche kind of small group thing. But generally, when you try to make it a community-based effort and you open source it in a sense, it usually gets adopted more readily and faster. So I wonder if thinking about broader open environments versus other modes may be also something to think about.
One question I had for the QI group. So what about talking about low-hanging fruit? The basis of QI oftentimes is benchmarking. Like, how are you doing compared to your peers? If we have the EHR data and we can measure exactly the length of mechanical ventilation for all your patients, and we can adjust based on the risk. Colin has worked on risk adjusting length of mechanical ventilation, and your standardized length of mechanical ventilation is way off compared to other centers, and he was able to show that, at least with the VPS data, with a lot of caveats, but there's clearly a lot of variability. Isn't that maybe like a low-hanging fruit to say, hey, your patients are being mechanically ventilated for 3 more days than the average patient adjusted for risk from this other unit. Maybe you should be talking to that unit and see what they're doing to get those kids liberated from the ventilator, and maybe start at that level, as opposed to generating fancy, ventilator weaning tool. Is just, go talk to, Reed, and that's what they're doing at Seattle. Seattle's probably sort of like our standard, best practice. Is it enough research just? Are we collecting enough? That's my question, because that's what Colin was trying to do with the VPS data. Is it enough granularity? Because the data we have is for admission. Like, what modifies the length of mechanical ventilation is not what happened on day one. It's a lot of things that happen, right? So how come we?
Yeah, and I think Tom or Randall can add to that, but the VPS attempts to do that right now. I think the challenge is twofold. One is, of course, all data are de-identified. But secondly, because they are de-identified, it's not easy to know site 1 from site 2, unless the two groups agree to share with each other. So there are attempts to come up with, micro collaboratives, if you may, within the larger group, but it's not readily accessible. Tom, I don't know if you want to comment, or Randall.
I think for someone who's looked at VPS data for the last 4.5 years very closely, the challenge is, what do you do with it? Where do you fix it, right? Like, it's great to know where you benchmark, but the granularity with which, why is it that we have a delay in discharge from our unit? Is that a systems thing? Is that our patients? Like, do we set the discharge and then we wait until they're weaned off high flow or whatever it is? And I think that's where the PDC data gets us a little more granularity. So if you could overlay those two, you've got a benchmark and you've got potentially a cause to say, at hospital A, these are your factors. At hospital B, here's some other factors. And everybody can then take that and deal with it in the way they need to at their institution. So I think that's an advantage of both sets of data granularity. Got it.
Tim, you got it. The VPS currently, we have metrics and we have outcome data. We don't have the detailed data that you need to be able to do those. That was never the intent of the VPS. We were always designed as a clinical platform to do quality improvement and clinical research from. So we don't have that level of data. We're not nimble enough at this point to even consider doing that. But paired with the VPICU, we could do it. And I think that's where hopefully we're going to be talking about some of that stuff tomorrow. Because right now, we know differences between the units. You can look at your units. Well, state of California, just so everybody knows, in 2014, they were all mandated to participate in a quality improvement, which happened to be VPS. So they see their data. We know how they all compare, all 30 units. So we've got that information. The problem is, how do you take that and really do quality improvement with it? Well, you have to form collaboratives, you have to have a plan, and then you have to pull data internally, for whether you use REDCap, whether you use VPICU, however you want to do it. We can't do that level within the VPS, but we have the metrics. We can throw that metrics back to it and say, hey, one of our concerns has been over the past few years, which is why we've been trying to do more leadership, if you will, within quality improvement, has to do with the fact that we've been doing this for years, and you've got a lot of metrics in VPS, but if you look at them, most of the places they're still at the same spot that they were 5 years ago, because that internal mechanism and data collection, money, support, internally hasn't been there the way that it was in the past. And I think that's where potentially looking at how we can pair these things up really has a lot of potential, because we have a lot of the quote outcomes that you're interested in. We're collecting a lot of the other pieces already. Granted, as you know, those of you that do VPS, the biggest handicap is having to have, and I don't look at it as a handicap in terms of what we're getting, but the big barrier is it's manpower issues for data entry. I don't have any concern about the quality of the data. We know that what they're putting in is pretty damn accurate and certainly good enough for what we want to do in QI and clinical research. But this going the next step, and how do we automate to get that in there so that those individuals can do and handle more volume, more detailed work, and put their skills to better use is where we really want to go. So, you know, hopefully we're going to spend more time on that tomorrow.
Hopefully.
Thanks. Just to kind of echo, but hopefully build upon, I think part of the reason that VPS data are hard to act on sometimes is it's because it's really easy to say, well, my unit's just different, right? So you tell me that Rainbow has the longest duration of mechanical ventilation, I'm just to say, well, our patients are just different. But if you had the granularity to say, well, actually, Steve, on average, once patients get to a PEEP of 5 and 30%, they're extubated in 9.7 hours, and in your unit, they're extubated in 39 hours, so maybe you need to do stuff. Like that degree of granularity is going to be transformational to not just help address the problem, but also, honestly, I think convince people that there's a problem there. On the other hand, if you showed me that, like, actually our patients really are just different and our duration of ventilation is long because it should be long, then there isn't a problem to fix, right?
Well, there's
So,
a lot of differences there, Steve.
very true. And trust me, yeah. But I think that adding this granularity on top of VPS is going to be amazing.
I've just been taking everything in, but I just wanted to add to the low-hanging fruit piece, like just like Nelson said, you know, to have everyone's duration of mechanical ventilation be able to benchmark, and then have the granularity, what your demographics look like would be great. And so, you know, we had all these grand plans of, oh, it would be awesome to make an ABCDF bundle, you know, prototype where it just spits out at you all these metrics, but we identified today we don't really know what the right metric is to spit out at someone to actually do continuous process improvement. So we decided for us, probably our low-hanging fruit, if we were tomorrow going to pick something, would be something like the SBS or the RAS that is, you know, well validated, utilized hopefully in every unit across the country, and is something that we can all agree on very clearly that is a metric that we're interested in. We don't want our patients to get more sedation than they need. So then if you can benchmark against, oh, our average SBS is a -2 versus another unit's a 0. Hopefully, if you have that other data, you can benchmark that pretty easily, and then look at duration of mechanical ventilation, how it relates, and then build the other ABCDF elements on top as we get the science to know exactly what the metrics should look like.
We're probably at time, unless there's any last minute. I want to say something. No, nobody wants to say anything. Okay, great. So, whew. No, that was just a round of applause for all of us for excellent crowdsourced discussions, very rich. So we have dinner tonight, sponsored by good Dr. Wetzel. He's going to pay for his own credit card. It's in Killer Shrimp in the Overkill room, but we're not going to kill anybody unless you have a fish allergy. Don't come. And it starts at 6 technically, but I think there's going to be some cocktail or whatever ESLs coming. Anyway, for the first hour or so you can show up. 6:15, 6:30. Was that? 6. There you go. 6. So and then it says, I don't know, like until 10, but we'll probably be done with dinner by 9, so all the East Coasters can go sleep and don't yell at us. So hopefully we'll see you there. Don't get lost. It's really easy to get there, right there. And I think. And so anyway, we'll see you in a little bit.